Behind Rebel Lines, Chapter 21. Butter refused to ever do anything but walk. I was nice to him. I tried hard not to smack him, even when his laziness angered me. I brought him treats, and I brushed him every day, and sometimes when I rode him, I dropped the reins on his neck and just let him wander around the pasture however he liked. When I stood at the corner gate and called his name, he came right to me, every time. And he stood without being tied while I brushed him and put his bridle on. I knew he liked me. He really did. But he wouldn't go faster, no matter what. He wouldn't run, and until he would run, I knew we'd never be able to jump. I was afraid Lady Thornton hadn't meant it when she said I could ask Mr. Grimes for help. But in the end, I decided I had to take the chance. "I'm going to visit Mr. Grimes," I said at lunch one day. It was a cold day. I was glad to be wearing one of Maggie's old sweaters. Miss Smith gave me an eye. "How? And why?" "I'll ride Butter," I said. Miss Smith stared. "I do ride him quite a bit," I said. "We get on well. He's a very nice pony. He wouldn't mind taking me there." "Ada," Miss Smith said, "I may be negligent, but I am not blind. I'm well aware how much you ride that pony." "Yes, miss," I said. "I've told you and told you to call me Susan," she said. "Your refusal to do so is starting to feel like an affront. Why do you want to visit Mr. Grimes?" "I just want to," I said. "He was nice to me." "Susan," I added. She rolled her eyes. "And?" she prompted. "And I'm having trouble with Butter, and I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I can't hardly get him to move. The Maggie's mom." "Lady Thornton," prompted Miss Smith. "Yeah, her. She said if I had trouble, I could ask Mr. Grimes for help." Miss Smith picked up a piece of carrot with her fork. She put it into her mouth and chewed slowly. "It hardly sounds like Butter," she said. "When I rode him, he was quite keen, and he's not gotten that much older." She picked up another piece of carrot. "All right," she said, after she'd chewed it and swallowed. "You may go. Do you remember how to get there?" I nodded. It was easy, just the 2 turns. Plus there was a fancy fence and iron gates at the start of the drive. Couldn't miss those. Miss Smith said, "If you're going to be riding out on the road, it might be better if you put a saddle on him. You could take the right stirrup off so it wouldn't bang against his side." She knew I wouldn't be able to use the right stirrup. It would hurt too much. "Is his the little one?" I asked. There were 3 saddles in the storage room, hung on racks and covered with cloth. 2 were the same size, and 1 was smaller. "Yes," Miss Smith said. "I'll show you." "It's all right," I said. "I don't need you." She looked at me for a long time. "I never know what to do for the 2 of you," she said at last. "I should have gone to Jamie's school earlier. I probably should supervise you more. But you'd hate it, wouldn't you?" I didn't think this was the sort of question that I needed an answer. I got up and scraped my plate into the trash, then filled the sink with soapy water to do the dishes. "Will you at least tell me if you're having trouble? Ask if you need help?" I didn't look at her. "I won't need help," I said. Behind me, Miss Smith sighed. "Have it your way," she said at last. The saddle was awkward, but I got it on him. I started to climb on, and the whole saddle shifted to one side. I got off, put it right, tightened the girth again. It had gone loose, I don't know why. The second time I climbed aboard, it stayed steady. We went through the gate and ambled down the road. The airfield no longer showed any traces of the explosion or the burned plane. Jamie said 3 people died, but he didn't know them. In the last week, more huts had gone up at the airfield, and one big tower that no one knew what was for. Planes sat parked in rows at the far side of the runway, and one plane kept coming toward the runway, touching down for a moment, and then rising into the air again. Round and round in loops. Butter barely flicked an ear to it. To him, planes landing and taking off had become as common as trees. Partway down the road, Butter balked and wanted to turn and go back home. I made him continue. He went stubborn after that, mouthing the bit and flicking his ears at me, as though cursing me in some low, hoarse language. He walked slower than ever, and I thought with longing of Jonathan's horse. A month ago, I'd been thrilled with Butter. Now I wanted something more. 2 months ago, I'd not seen trees. Eventually, we made it to Maggie's house, and around to the stable yard. Mr. Grimes was there in the yard, rinsing a big gray horse with water from a bucket. "Aye," he said when he saw me. "Aye," I said back, suddenly feeling shy. He hadn't said I could visit. Only Maggie's mum had said that, and maybe Mr. Grimes wouldn't like it. I slid off Butter and put my right foot behind my left. Mr. Grimes looked me up and down. "Wait there," he said. He put the horse he was tending into a stall. "Now," he said, coming toward me, "explain what you were doing riding this poor animal down the road." "I wanted to help," I said. "I can't make him go." "I should think not." He bent toward Butter's forefeet. "Hasn't had his feet trimmed in years, has he?" "Bet not since that other one died, that Miss Becky." He stalked off and came back with his hands full of metal tools. "You just hold him," he said. He cradled Butter's hoof upside down in his hand. And then, with a sort of pincher thing, he cut Butter's hoof right off. I screamed. Butter startled. Mr. Grimes straightened, dropping Butter's foot. Butter still had quite a bit of hoof left, I saw. But the cut-off part lay on the cobbled yard, curved and thick and horrible looking. Mr. Grimes said, "Does it look like I'm hurting him?" It didn't. I couldn't believe it. Butter stood perfectly calm. "Ponies' hooves are like our fingernails," he said. He picked up another tool and rasped Butter's short hoof smooth. "They grow, and they have to be trimmed." Miss Smith was a bear for having our fingernails trimmed. She'd trimmed them the second day we were with her, and our toenails too, and she kept us to trim them every week. With clippers, not just nibbling off the broken bits like I used to. It was strange. Mr. Grimes was right. It didn't hurt. "His are so overgrown they're hurting him," Mr. Grimes continued, moving on to Butter's other front foot. "Probably hurts him to walk at all. And he couldn't really go faster, not without tripping himself. He's showing sense. This ought to make a big difference." I felt stung. I'd been hurting him, and I didn't know. "Some people shouldn't own ponies," Mr. Grimes said, as though echoing my thoughts. Then he looked at me. "I don't mean you," he said. "Coming from London and being your age and all, how could you know? But that Miss Smith, she just threw the pony into the field once she'd sold Miss Becky's hunters, and she never looked at him again as far as I can tell. She told me ponies could do just fine eating grass." "Aye, that's true, but it's not the only thing they need. If someone gave you enough to eat, but didn't keep you clean or healthy, or ever show you any kind of love, how would you feel?" I said, "I wouldn't feel hungry." Mr. Grimes laughed. "Well, that's so." When he finished, he said, "You bring him back here in 4 weeks or so I can trim him again. Usually you'd say every 6 weeks, but we'll have a bit of work to do before he's back to normal. Ordinarily the village farrier to do it, but he enlisted last week." I nodded, searched my head for the right words to say. Found them. "Thank you very much, Mr. Grimes." His eyes crinkled, but he didn't smile. He pulled off his hat, revealing a nearly bald head, and scratched himself behind one ear. "It's just Grimes," he said. "Mr. Grimes, that would be like if I were a butler or something important. But if we're going to be friends, you can call me Fred." "Fred." I held out my hand, the way the colonel had. Fred shook it. "And you're?" he prompted. "Ada," I said. "Ada Smith, but just Ada to you." Fred took me all around the pony. He cut Butter's long, tangled mane. Normally we'd pull it, not cut it, but this mess is hopeless. And showed me how to start untangling his tail. He taught me how to clean the saddle and bridle, and how to oil them over and over with tiny dollops of oil on a rag. "You keep doing that," he said, "and any other tack you see at Miss Smith's, you oil that too. Leather dries out. It'll be ruined if it goes neglected much longer." Then he told me he had to get on working. "Too much to do these days," he said. "We've had to put the hunters back to grass. Too much for one man to keep 'em legged up and properly strapped and all. And anyways, there's no hunting with the war on. But even still, it's nearly all I can do, caring for 13 horses." "I can help," I said. I'd be grateful," he said. We'd already put Butter into an empty stall, while I worked on the tack. I helped grain, hay, and water the horses, bad foot and all, and he didn't say a word about my limping, or expect me not to be able to do things. When we were finished, I saddled and bridled Butter. Fred gave me a leg into the saddle. "Maggie said horses could have clubfoot," I said. "She said you could fix it." I tried not to feel hopeful. He said, "in horses, you fix it with special shoes. It's not like clubfoot in people, though." "I don't think. That's what you've got?" I nodded. "Can't help you," he said, "but I'll help you otherwise whenever you like. You come back." I went down the drive. I turned left at the road, which I knew was correct, but after that, I'm not sure what happened. It should have been easy to find Miss Smith's house. Instead, I got lost.